Chapter 16, and we start off with an excerpt from Dr. Houston Brooks's notes. But to return to our hypothesis, in order to explain the change of the variations, we have adventured to make the earth hollow, and the place another within it. And I doubt not that this will find opposers enough. That is from Edmund Halley, an account of the cause of the changes of the variations of the magnetic needle, with a hypothesis of the structure of the internal parts of the earth. Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, number 195, 1962, pages 563 to 578. Inside the base, Serizawa witnessed Mothra's arrival and the retreat of the storm, the restoration of balance at least in his corner of the world. He wished Vivini could have lived to see this. The vindication of their beliefs. Beautiful, he muttered. All the more wonderful because of the hope she brought in this dark moment. And yet Mothra was only one. With Ghidorah commanding the other titans, how much could she do? Mothra, Dr. Chen said, queen of the monsters. Serizawa thought he heard pride in her voice. He knew her twin sister Ling was on the Yunnan replacement crew, but there was more to her excitement. Her family's history with Monarch was old as his own, and her knowledge of the mythic import of the titans was greater than anyone's. Had she suspected Mothra was different? Did she know more about Mothra than she let on? Just then Mark came in, soaked to the bone. "Stanton, are you recording this?" he asked. "I record everything, man," Stanton said. "Everything." He turned up the sound, and the room was filled with what might be a choir of crickets and cicadas, but more musical than that. "It's like a song," Chen said. "Is the bug communicating?" Admiral Stan said. "There's more," Admiral Mark said. "It's just outside our hearing range." "I'll bet there's only one thing that can understand this," Stanton said. That was right. If Mothra was communicating, who was she talking to? Not Ghidorah. "Gojira," Serizawa said. "Yep," Stanton confirmed. "I'm picking up the reply." Another sound joined Mothra's song. A faint thud, a deep moan. "He's still alive," Chen said. Serizawa took a breath. Mothra hadn't come to fight a losing battle. She had come to show them the way, to bring Godzilla back. That was the rational core of the hope he'd felt at the sight of her petal-like wings. Others, of course, were not so reverent. Barnes, for instance, the chief warrant officer, jested at the goddess. "So her and Godzilla have some sort of thing going on," he said. "Kind of messed up, right?" "Symbiotic relationship between different species aren't that uncommon," Sam said. "Still messed up," Barnes said. "Can you track him?" Serizawa asked. There was no time to waste. The world was spiraling into chaos. If there was something they could do, the quicker they did it, the better. "No," Stanton replied. "Signal's too weak." He turned his gaze to Mothra. "But maybe she can." Chen glanced over at Mark. "You asked for a miracle," she told him. "I think we just got one." "How many nukes do you have?" Mark asked. Serizawa wrinkled his brow. "Why?" he said. "We can help him." For the first time in a while, Serizawa smiled. The plan came together quickly, as it had to. The fleet was fueled, provisioned, and made ready for war. Ships were called in from nearby ports and bases. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, one Ticonderoga-class cruiser stocked with Tomahawk missiles alongside smaller but still deadly vessels. They had half a dozen nuclear subs, one of whom served as Admiral Stan's command center. Most of the others would join the fight as well. But one was being outfitted for something special. Serizawa thought this was probably the largest fleet of war deployed since World War II. They had air power too. Squadrons of jets and helicopters had been assembled as well. This battle group represented all of the might Monarch and the government could bring together. But Serizawa knew that without Godzilla, it wouldn't be enough. Everything now rested on the sword's edge. which might be a fitting name for the submarine the techs were getting ready for him, and his people loading it up with nuclear weapons. That was his part of the mission. This plan, Stanton said, nervously, is what we call a long shot, right? No, Serizawa said. It's our only shot. Yeah, Stanton said. Cool. He took a slug from a flask. After he was certain he had everything he needed on the submarine, Serizawa went to Viviani's room. All of her things were still there, although there weren't that many of them. Some clothes and some small assortment of hats, a photograph of the two of them when she'd first joined Monarch, along with the team he'd been working with at the time, including Brooks. She'd been so young, so full of wonder, so intelligent. What, 22 maybe? She had called him Sensei the first time they met, and she had never called him anything else. She had more compassion than anyone he'd ever met, and until the day she died, she had never lost her sense of wonder. Beside those things, there was her collection, an Indonesian Garuda bird pipe, a Thunderbird mask, carved by a Haida artist, a wooden statuette of Minokoa, the moon-swallowing bird monster of Bagabo folklore she'd picked up on their trip to the Philippines to see a fossilized titan skeleton, various small pieces of art from around the world that she thought might represent folk memories of titans. He picked up one of them, a similar pendant carved from stone, a bipedal lizard with a long thick tail and ragged dorsal spines. He had given her that one himself, on her 13th birthday. His father had given it to him years before. His father had been given it by a Japanese man who had carved it from memory. But who should it pass on to now? Viviani had no children. She'd had a few relationships, but had never married, and as far as he knew, hadn't remained close to any of them. She was too devoted to her work, something he understood and appreciated very deeply. She had some nieces and nephews he knew, but they would never understand its worth. She had been close to Emma and Madison these past few years, but it hardly seemed practical to give it to either of them at the moment. Maybe it had come back to him, then, at least for a time. He put it in his pocket. He closed the door leading into the hall. He had never told her how much he appreciated her all those years, how much easier it made his work and his life to have someone who truly understood him and what he was working for. He thought she knew, he hoped she had. "You are irreplaceable," he told her, and felt a tear trace down his face. Barnes studied the thermal map Foster pulled up, depicting the hurricane engulfing most of the East Coast. It was a real monster, bigger than any storm he'd ever seen, but that wasn't what made it so creepy. That would be the eye of the storm, where he could just barely make out the infrared form of their three-headed friend. Foster was laying out the battle plan. This Category 6 hurricane over DC is where King Ghidorah is nesting, she said. Working with all four branches of the military, this will be a joint operation to lure it away from the mainland, so that we can continue evacuations long enough for our submersible team to complete its mission. So it was the Isla del Mata thing all over again, only with a lot more people to get out of harm's way. On the one hand, but a hell of a lot more firepower on the other. They were going after this monster fully loaded. Yeah, Griffin said, but what do these nerds think they're gonna do down there with that bunch of nukes? Didn't you hear, Griffin? Barnes said. We're bringing Godzilla back from the dead. Sam and Foster stayed with the Argo to coordinate the action against Ghidorah. Mark, Serizawa, Stanton, Chen, and the others boarded the submarine. Mark wasn't sure if Sam looked mournful or scared shitless. Either way, it felt a little odd that they weren't alone on the same ride anymore. Mark had never been in a submarine before, nor was it on his bucket list. And as the hatches closed, bells chimed, and the engine started up, he realized he felt a little claustrophobic, something he hadn't known about himself. And they weren't even underwater yet. He was a long way from the open plains he had become accustomed to over those many months. Since Serizawa and the others had shown up in Colorado, everything about his life was contracting. His choices, the very space he inhabited, his path was working its way towards a tightrope, and his balance wasn't all that great. They were in motion, however, nosing along towards Mothra, who seemed to be beckoning them on, hopefully towards Godzilla. But could you ever really know what a glowing moth with an 800-foot wingspan was up to? Of course not. But it was the only lead they had, a bet they were playing for a whole lot of people. He could only hope it paid off. He turned his attention to the moment, and the video conference with Colonel Foster. "We'll be out of range while you're down there," Foster told them, "but a squadron will stay behind to keep an eye out on you. Just don't be gone long, okay?" Sam said. "And Mark, don't worry, I'll keep listening for medicine." "Thanks, Sam," Mark said. He meant it. The guy had really rubbed him the wrong way at first, but he meant well. Everyone around him was in motion. The commander of the submarine, Crane, a square-jawed, dark-eyed, serious fellow, was busy planning a course with the executive officer. Bowman, Chen, and Stanton were mapping Godzilla's vitals, which seemed a little odd. They weren't thinking about surgery, were they? He tried to imagine how that could be done. Probably they were talking about how to maximize the bomb's energy. Everyone was doing something except for him. Mark felt like a still point, and for once, that was okay. He had put this in motion, but now he was just along for the ride. "All right, Bowman," Commander Crane said. "Now we finished with the course. Let's take her down." "Dive the ship," Bowman said, "and make depth 150. "Good luck," Sam said from the screen. "Thanks," Mark replied. "We'll need it." Serizawa was playing with his pocket watch again, a sign he was thoughtful or nervous, or both, often both. Mark offered the scientist coffee. "What time is it?" he asked. A wistful little smile drew across Serizawa's face. "Time to get a new watch," he said. In an instant, Mark's mind raced back to a quieter time, and the laughter of a young boy. He could almost hear it, the funny little arpeggio of his son's giggling composed. "Andrew's favorite joke," Mark said. "You could never take that thing out without him asking." He stopped. Why were even the good memories so painful? Shouldn't it be getting easier? He took in a deep, clean breath and went on. "If you told me 5 years ago that saving the thing that took my son was the best shot at saving the family I've left..." He stopped. He had spent a lot of time avoiding memories of Andrew. It was the only way he'd been able to stop drinking and to focus on Maddie. But now the cog of his mind had slipped. The memories were coming back. He wasn't sure he could bear it. "Sometimes," Serizawa said, "the only way to heal our wounds is to make peace with the demons who created them." "You really believe that?" Mark said. "Don't you?" Serizawa said. "Isn't that why we're here?" Mark didn't know what to say. Maybe it was, although he certainly hadn't thought so. He'd thought it was all about Maddie, about saving what he had, not dealing with what was lost. "There are some things beyond our understanding, Mark," Serizawa said. "The laws of nature are beautiful, but they can also be cruel and unfair. But we cannot control these things, or run from them. We must accept them and learn from them. Because these moments of crisis are also potential moments of faith, a time when we either come together or fall apart, and nature always has a way of balancing itself. The only question is, what part will we play?" It was one of the longest speeches Mark had ever heard, the usual laconic Serizawa gave. "Did you just make that all up?" Mark asked. "No," Serizawa said. "I read it from a fortune cookie once. A really long fortune cookie." Mark smiled, but the moment passed too quickly. The sub lurched violently and began rocking like crazy, deafening alarms blaring in the closed quarters. Had Ghidorah found them, One of the other titans. One of the aquatic ones. What was that one in Loch Ness called? Leviathan. Could it have gotten here so fast? He hadn't noticed anything near them in the last tracking data, but they weren't being battered or eaten. Actually, since the initial bump, they were just sort of leaning and twisting. Status of the ship, Commander Kane said. Some sort of vortex, Captain, Bowman said. It's dragging us. The ship groaned, metal straining and pinning as it began to spiral downward into ever deeper water. Ship is still descending, Bowman said, counting down towards the seafloor. 400 feet, 450. Brace for impact, Crane shouted. The mostly empty shelter left plenty of space for Madison to work in. Jonah's mercenaries weren't even doing a whole lot of guarding or patrolling. No one on the outside knew they were here, and everyone who might think to look was currently distracted by the impending end of the world. Further proof her mum had fallen in on the wrong side. While she was holed up safe from what she had unleashed, the rest of Monarch was out there fighting, rather than taking to the shelters. Because even the shelters wouldn't be much use if the atmosphere was fired and every living thing outside besides Monster Zero was dead. Jonah thought he and the other survivors were going to live like kings. Maybe, if by that he meant the miserable lice-eaten thug in the Dark Ages who had started calling themselves kings. She found a bolt cutter and the storage lockers. With a little help from the first, she opened up the second, and jackpot, everything she needed. Rations and medical supplies, all sorts of stuff that would come in handy. She loaded her pack and grabbed a stun gun. Despite her advantages, she knew she had to work fast. Once they realized she wasn't in a room, that they didn't know where she was, things would heat up. Jonah would put guards on all the exits and she would be screwed. So get going, Madison. She quickly walked to the control room. Normally, if someone saw her there, they wouldn't think much about it. But now, with the backpack and all, it would raise suspicions. So when she heard someone inside, she ducked behind a corner. Just in time, Jonah and one of his killers came out and walked off down another corridor. She didn't hear anybody else, so she crept up and peeked in. She couldn't see anyone, but thankfully, what she had come for was there. The orca. She had worried Jonah might hide it someplace or even destroy it. But that wasn't really his style. He enjoyed power over others. He probably thought it was funny that her mother could look at the machine but never touch it. His mistake. She stepped towards it, nervously. Once she actually took it. 3 steps in, she realized she had screwed up. She heard a faint scuff of shoes and something threw a shadow on her. Whoever it was must have been at the corner. She spun around, hoping it was Mum, ready to come up with some kind of story, but instead found one of Jonah's men looking over her. She didn't know his real name, but in her mind she had been calling him the Mountain due to his size. She gave him her best sheepish, "I didn't mean to," grin, then shot him with the stun gun. It worked astonishingly well. He jerked like a fish on a hook. His legs went all wobbly, and he pitched to the floor with a ponderous thud. The bigger they come, she thought. Once he was down, she quickly packed up the orca and moved on to the second part of her plan. She climbed up on a desk and used a screwdriver to take out the bottom screws of the grill of an air vent. She first pulled and then pushed the grill, bending it up. When it was wide enough, she shoved the orca in, then gripped the edge of the vent. Pulling herself up was harder than she thought it would be. Her brilliant plan might have already fallen apart, but she dug down deep, jumping and jerking with her arms at the same time. She managed to get an elbow up, and then the other. And from there she pulled until her belly was on the edge, and she could wriggle in like a worm. Sometimes it was good to be small. She managed to turn around in the narrow duct, reach up and bend the grill back down. It wasn't perfectly flush, it jutted about an inch, but it was better than leaving it wide open. Every second she wasn't found out was like gold at this point. She started crawling as softly as she could, trying to remember the turns from the specs she had pulled up. It's going to be fine, she thought. By the time they think to look up here, I'll be out and away. She came to another vent and paused to get her bearings. As per her calculations, she was passing the cafeteria. She hadn't expected to see her mother there. She was just sitting, staring into a cup of coffee. Maddie considered her, momentarily paralyzed with guilt. She knew her mother. It was all finally catching up with her. Her mother could push her feelings pretty far down, but she couldn't erase them, and now they were coming back up. That might be okay if things had gone the way she had planned. She could justify the terrible things she had done, but Monster Zero had changed all of that. She was already at a low point. Maddie running away was just going to crush her. But there was no choice now. She had zapped one of Jonah's men and stolen the orca. He wasn't going to just give her a pass on that. And at the very least, he would destroy the orca or lock it up someplace where no one would get to it. At worst, he might go ahead and kill her, and maybe Mum too. No, there was no turning back. Her gaze lingered on her mother for another heartbeat, and then she moved on, crawling as quickly as possible. With each breath, she thought she would hear alarms, or shouts, or whatever. Surely the man she'd stunned had recovered by now, or someone had found him. Her heart felt like it was crowding up into her throat, and the air duct felt as if it was growing smaller, tighter. When she finally reached the emergency exit hatch, she hustled towards it, unlatched it, and pushed it open enough to peek through. She saw trees and underbush, but no guards or vehicles. Taking the chance, she climbed out and then closed the hatch. She was alone in a patch of woods, but in the distance she saw swarms of aircraft flitting above the familiar city skyline. Boston. Without hesitation, she hefted the orca and started towards the lights. It was going to be a long walk.